For the past few days, I have really been contemplating and much prayer, just asking God, what do you want me to say? As I was feeling the anguish and the heartbreak and just feeling the feelings of astonishment as I watched the video of the senseless, horrific, atrocious beating, kicking, dragging, pepper spraying, tasing, and eventually murder of TYRE NICHOLS, this 29-year-old man, father of a 4-year-old son, a man who was an employee at FedEx or for FedEx, loved to wear Vans shoes, enjoyed life, enjoyed taking photography of sunsets, was murdered after being beat down like an animal during a traffic stop by a police unit called the Scorpion Unit out of Memphis, Tennessee. I've been praying and I said, God, what do you want me to say, or am I to say anything at all? Help me to understand what is really going on as we hear about all these senseless murders and beatings by police against black people, but even more against black men, even our young black men. And this morning, right before church, God gave me, I say, a rhema word, a rhema understanding that we in America have been dealing with the symptoms. See, the police beatings, the brutality, the shooting of black men while running from them, the murdering of black men, black women, black children, is really a symptom to really the deep-seated historical conditioning in this country about black people that originated in slavery, that is still knitted and sewn into the fabric of this nation. And you'll learn more as I begin to speak that a symptom is an indication that something is existing from something else. So while we see the symptom of black men being shot down and beat and dragged out of the car and killed, it is really the existing of the historical conditioning that's been existing in our country. Today, I've really come to say that we must not only deal, I had to write it down, it's just this much to say, that we must not only deal with the symptoms, but we must also eradicate the historical conditioning that is embedded in the fabric of this land called America. And we must end the catastrophic perpetuation of the systemic influence in our society and in the crevices of our states, of our counties, and in communities. For too long have we been watching the senseless murder of black men, women, and children, such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Amir Locke and Dante Wright, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Terrence Crutcher, Walter Scott, and the most recent, TYRE NICHOLS. We've watched the egregious forms of police brutality and murder that have occurred from no-knock warrants and racial profiling and deep-seated racism and the exerting of power and control from the bosom of hearts filled with the spirit of white supremacy. We've seen police brutality and murders existing against black men from bystanders, that's other police officers who have witnessed such heinous acts, who then in turn are acting with the same mentality that they can commit police brutality and murder against black men. Today, I submit to us that we can no longer just see and deal with the symptoms, but that we must look at the historical condition that has led up to the massive societal ills of black men being beat down, tasered, dragged, spit on, snatched out of cars, black men that have endured horrific forms of police brutality at the hands of law enforcement officers. The symptoms that we see, the perpetual police brutality and murdering of black men by police is really the indication that something else is in existence. And unfortunately, until we eradicate this historical conditioning in America, we will continue to see the symptom of black men being murdered by the police. We know this to be true because even after the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, and after the conviction and sentencing of Derek Chauvin to 22 and a half years in prison, in 2022 alone, 27% of black men were still being killed by the police. There is an historical conditioning that is at the root of the symptom. And it's the illegitimate stereotypes that have been ingrained in the soil of this land that we live in against the life, the dignity, the respect, the democracy, the recognition, and esteem that every black man in this country is deserving of and owed such regard. And this historical conditioning needs to be dismantled against the black man's life. And I'm going to get more into how it originated in slavery and has entangled its offensive, its oppressive, its destructive and demonic spirit of dissemination against the black man's character, his integrity, his purpose, his God-given value, and life in our land. You see, this historical conditioning against black men began in slavery. It was knitted into the fabric of our country and is in existence even today. It originated from slavery that dehumanizing the black man was a fundamental right for white supremacy. It was embedded and knitted in our land from slavery that white slave owners had the right to employ oppressive, abusive, demeaning, and dehumanizing acts against black men and black people to get them into forced coercion of behaving and thinking as they wanted them to. We are dealing with historical conditioning from slavery that white men could invoke their superiority over black men with the compelled use of violence and brutalization of treatment. We're still dealing with the historical conditioning that the brutal and dehumanizing of black men was upheld back in slavery by states and government levels and was politicized to maintain control of white superiority. We're still dealing with the historical conditioning of black men that when they ran from slave owners, when they're running from the police today, they were brutally punished by merciless beatings and maimings, lynching, and murder. We still see the historical conditioning of what was knitted into the fabric of our nation from slavery, laws and policies that were enforced against blacks that were used because of the white superiority societal perceptions that blacks were to be patrolled back in slavery, but really gunned down and murdered today by the government's rule, which is the police system, the brutality of police, which back then in slavery was controlled by the spirit of white supremacy and which is existing even today. We see the historical conditioning of governments that condoned the horrific treatment of black men and preserved the context of white supremacy as superiority to blacks, embedding these stereotypical beliefs and perceptions that black men in slavery were considered to be nothing more than savage beasts. They were being beat and murdered because they were considered by perception of white superiority that they were stronger than white men and that they could endure much more pain than any other race. But despite the Emancipation Proclamation that abolished slavery, blacks remained, even from that point, to be treated with the indifference of their free position and rights and dignities of humanity. These same historical conditioning from slavery were sick stereotypes against blacks. And they have prevailed even today, from slavery to today, until we untie them from the fabric of our nation. The systemic forms of racism against black men into the bowels of our society, into the existence and perpetuation of existence into our nation. You see, the Jim Crow laws from 1876 to 1965 made sure that blacks were not given the same rights of citizenship as white Americans. And throughout history, we see from slavery to now that black men have been and are consistently being dehumanized, degraded, and afflicted with the historical conditioning that was rooted in slavery and brought stereotypes of existence today and furthers of eternalized oppressive perceptions about black people and black men. Throughout history, we've seen blacks and black men have perpetually been exposed to negative stereotypes and false and negative racial identities. Throughout history, we've seen specifically our black men have endured biased stereotypes and demarcations that they are really unintelligent beings, that they're monkeys, that they're lazy, that they're all violent criminals and dangerous, worthless ideologies, identities that have been historically conditioned from slavery into today. It has stemmed from the long historical roots of slavery and wrongful stereotypes. Therefore, today, from slavery today, making the meaningful purpose and value of the black man's life become reduced to hysterical perceptions from slavery and conditioning that black men are nothing more than a savage beast and should be treated with indignities and considered less than nothing, worse than an animal. It is these invoking of historical conditioning that has caused the dignity, respect, humanity, and democracy in regard of the black man to be ignored. It is the evoking of this historical conditioning that built the foundation of policing and birthed police brutality into the land. It is from the historical conditioning of slavery that have given the perceptions of treatment against black men by police that it's okay to establish the ideology and practices of slavery, such as beating and lynching and maiming, into today's society that were inherited from the deep codes of the South. This dehumanizing of black men continued post-legal slavery and after the Civil War. And we were seeing for years and decades how blacks, even after slavery, black men were mistreated and were given the implementation and employing of barbaric actions against black men by the police. We saw that, and we known it was no secret because it was public information during the civil rights era of how this country really felt about the black man. It was known that black men were victims of police brutality during the civil rights movement and era, and that they incurred black men, black police officers, mysterious deaths while serving in the line of duty. You see, the foundation and concrete ideologies and policies of policing that was built upon the context and infiltration of white supremacy. Let me break it down. The foundation in America originated from the perceptions, the mindsets, the practices of white supremacy during slavery. And those same mindsets and ideologies and perceptions about the black man was instituted into the foundations of policing that we have seen historically and even today. The enacting of police tactics and behaviors enforced was sanctioned by historical conditioning of abusive practices, actions that were tolerated and, sad to say, still accepted today as tolerated in slavery. Those same methods of control and slavery against black people and black men are the same methods that sit in the heart of many police officers, of their methods of control, compliance, and coercion to obey, are the same practices that were used in slavery that are now deeply rooted into the institution of policing. We see the historical conditioning against the black man by law enforcement and the criminal justice system that have been able to perpetuate in our land and manifest itself even since the 17th century. We see that when black men are in prison at a rate 5 times more than other ethnicities. We see that when black men are 5 times more apt to be stopped by the police than white men. We see this when black men are 2 times more to be stopped than black women. We see the historical conditioning of policing instituted from slavery to now, when 65% of black men are targeted by the police than any other race. When we see that black men are 32% more to be arrested, 42% more to be arrested, and 52% more to be indicted. We know the catastrophic effects of this historical conditioning of views and perception against the black man, because today, by the police killing black men, there are 50 million black men that are enduring poor mental health as a result of what they've seen, experienced, or witnessed. Police brutality and the killing of armed black men have been normalized in our society. You can't tell me that it's not been normalized in our society, that even when the GOP refused to pass the George Floyd Policing Act of 2021, this was a police reforming bill after we as a country and nation marched and witnessed the horrific lynching, the knee to the neck of George Floyd. For over 9 minutes, the brutal killing, murder, and lynching of George Floyd. The GOP still refused to take the drafted legislation by the Democrats and pass it. This policing act, this George Floyd Policing Act of 2021, would have given legislation that would have banned chokeholds, that would have unqualified immunity for law enforcement, that would have banned no-knock warrants in federal drug cases, that would have mandated data collection on police encounters, and what would have established what is needed, that must take place, that must exist, a nationwide police misconduct registry. This normalization of historical conditioning is why we will continue to see police brutality and murder against black men if not eradicated. We as a society must eradicate this historical conditioning instituted deeply in the foundation of policing. And if we look at what conditioning is, conditioning means to train or influence a person or an animal mentally so that they do or expect a particular thing without thinking about it. The historical conditioning that was instituted in the fabric and foundation of policing in this America was to degrade, to disregard, to dehumanize, to devalue, to violate the civil and constitutional rights of every black man. And we see that conditioning existing today. But we must eradicate this historical conditioning from police departments and police agencies anywhere at any time, that they have the right to disarm, to disenfranchise, and violate the constitutional and civil rights of black men by racially profiling them at traffic stops. And even if they find probable cause to stop them, they do not have the right to employ barbaric acts of dehumanization. They do not have the right to beat down, drag, spit, taser, and pepper spray black men without cause, and to even murder them. And there's never cause to beat them down. I'm speaking of when people need to be tased, when there's appropriate reason for tasing. We need to eradicate the historical conditioning by police agencies and departments that they have the right to enact what the American Psychological Association calls conditional responses and conditional reflexes. Conditional responses come from something that is learned or acquired from a conditioned stimulus. A stimulus is a thing that arouses energy in someone or something or spur an incentive. We need to eradicate the historical conditioning in policing that they can have conditional responses when in traffic stops that allow them to beat on, to drag, to spit, to kick, and to murder innocent black men. We need to eradicate their stimulation of what they've been indoctrinated to believe about black men and the value of life of a black man. We must eradicate this historical conditioning that the police, whether black, white, Hispanic, or any color, do not have the right to operate in these conditional responses and conditional reflexes. We can no longer continue to turn on the TV and see the senseless and brutal murder of our black men, husbands and fathers and sons, being shot down in the street, being shot in their back while running from the police out of fear, being shot in their cars, being shot with their wives or significant others, being shot while walking, being profiled in front of convenience stores, being killed, chokehold, and put to death. We must eradicate this historic conditioning of the police and their conditional reflexes, such as we saw with the Scorpion unit in Memphis. Those were conditional responses and conditional reflexes because they got a joy out of terrorizing their community. Instead of abiding by the oath that they swore to protect and serve, they enjoyed the sting of committing horrific and barbaric acts against the citizens who entrusted them to protect and serve them. It is time that we end the systemic racism against blacks and black men. I come to tell you today, I'm not against the Black Lives Movement, but I'm tired of the hypocrisy that exists with it. If we're going to be about Black Lives Matter, then we need to be about that consistently, without fail, steadfast and being immovable, although all lives matter. But we understand that the disproportionate rate of injustice and disparities that exist against black people and black men, even more specifically, is one of the creation that black lives do matter. But yet we find, or I find myself, that this is becoming a hypocrisy. Because it concerns me that in our educational system, filled with black educators and leaders, that they are the perpetuators of the historical conditioning that our young black boys don't deserve an education, and that they are more suited for suspensions and expelling than education and acquiring a free and appropriate education. These are the same black educators and leaders that are sitting at IEP meetings and parent meetings and school board meetings and withholding education from children, basic foundational education that is needed and necessary, that if not secured and acquired by the 4th grade, the age of 9, we will set these young black boys up for great tendency to pipeline through the juvenile system and then the adult prison system. It's hard for me to believe that Black Lives Matter when employers are hanging Black Lives Matter signs in their agencies. Yet they're infiltrating actions that stifle black employees such as black men from promotions and advancements, and are furthering senseless acts of injustice, disparity, and institutional racism against black people. It's hard for me to believe that in our courts, Black Lives Matter, when we see the disproportionately rates of black men receiving lengthier sentencing and higher case indictments, and the furtherance of mass incarceration of black men to prison. It's hard for me to believe that Black Lives Matter when black men who are returning citizens are coming back into the communities, they're not given opportunities for employment amidst their other ethnicities that are. I find it hard to matter that we're quiet that Black Lives Matter when APA African American study courses are being removed from educational schools and high schools and colleges, such as in Florida. I find it hard to believe that Black Lives Matter when Black politicians are witnessing and condoning the enacting of laws and policies that further the disenfranchisement of the rights of Black men and Blacks, and willfully support the furtherance of infringement of rights just for a vote for their own political height and ascendancy. I find it hard that Black Lives Matter when the Black church is still quiet after seeing all this exist, knowing that social injustice was at the heartbeat of Jesus Christ when he walked in the earth. Psalm 82:3 says, give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. The afflicted, Black men being shot down and beat by the police. Isaiah 1:17 says, learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct opposition. Bring justice to the fatherless and please the widow's cause. Proverbs 31:9 says, open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the needy and the afflicted. Matthew 25:4 speaks really from the heart of Jesus that the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you do it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you've done it to me. We, the church, must advocate and pursue justice for the eradication of the disparities and the mistreatment, the injustice and disenfranchisement of rights against Black men that is existing and alive in our land today. We, the church, are still stagnant and operating in a safe mode of condition. We have enabled the power of the government to control our God-given power. And I'm talking about the Holy Ghost power, the resurrected power of God, to infiltrate the systemic systems of racism and barriers that are indoctrinated through our governmental agencies, through lawmaking bodies, through court systems, through law enforcement agencies, educational institutions, sport organizations, medical facilities, housing initiatives and acquisitions, employers, social service agencies, and other respective entities. We have failed to remember the bloodshed, sweat, and tears of our ancestors whose cries of racial justice and equality were heard in the sun-scorched fields and plantations with voices singing, come by here, Lord. Come by here, Lord. Somebody needs you. Come by here, Lord. Somebody's praying, Lord. Come by here. We fail to remember those who pursued social and racial justice while facing the daring look of death in their face. Those such as Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. and Harriet Tubman. We have failed to remember that we can only breathe the freedom of democracy because our ancestors and forefathers exhaled their last breath at the times of being lynched and shot down as an animal. We must arise today, and we must collectively, each one of us, and help to eradicate this historical conditioning. And we, the church, must remember that God has given us, according to 2 Timothy 1:7, God has given us the spirit, the power, the spirit, his spirit, the spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. God has not given us a spirit of fear. We have no need to be silent, but we must arise. Therefore, we, the church, must take our resurrected power, God, alongside those in our community, alongside those sitting in political positions, alongside those in Congress, alongside those in educational entities, alongside those in medical institutions, and alongside those in correctional and law enforcement agencies, to ensure that there is a furtherance and that our communities are being permeated with the understanding, the righteous regard and understanding that every Black life does matter and every Black man's life does matter, and that we must eradicate that systemic human conditioning and historical conditioning from slavery that has ripped the lives of precious Black men, Black women, and Black children off this earth. We must ensure that the pen Declaration of Independence is revived today with fresh ink. That we also believe, as back then on July 4th, 1776, that all black men, that we too hold the truth, that all black men to be self-evident, that all men, black men included, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that these among a life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which governments are created to protect, state and federal, and that as long as we have the indwelling power of God, His power and authority on the inside of us, that we, the church, will come alongside those in our communities, those in our states, those in our government, and we won't shrink back from our biblical assignment to ensure social injustice in this earth realm as commissioned and ordained by God. And that we would take the valuable mindset and understanding of John Lewis, the great Congressman John Lewis, the great civil rights leader John Lewis, that when we see something that is not right, that when we see something that is not fair, that when we see something that is not just, that we have to speak up, that we have to say something, that we have to do something. For too long have we watched the voices of the Negro, of the black man, been silent. Too long have our voices been silent when injustice exists in our voting in Atlanta. Too long have we been silenced in our marching. Too long have we been silenced in our righteous and nonviolent protesting. Too long have we been silent sitting on church pews and folding our hands and looking inward instead of remembering that the commission, the Great Commission, is outside the church. Too long have we been silent that we have allowed the furtherance of the voices of black men to become silent by the symptom of perpetual police brutality and murder as they lay in graves that took their right to use their voice, that took the dignity of their humanity, and the very conscience of this America that said they had unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that was snatched from them by the historical conditioning of instituted white supremacy, stereotypical ideologies from slavery, mindsets that the black man was nothing more than an animal and a beast and should be treated as such. It is those voices that if we remain silent and we don't arise, we will allow the historical conditioning to mock and to continue to silence the lives of other black men as their lives are snatched from the freedom of their democracy, the dignity of their humanity, and their right to live free as anybody else in this great land of America, in that which we've been told it is. Yet it stands with question that if we don't come together as a collective force, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, the church, alongside and hold accountable those that are in position to make change, then we will have the blood on our hands, their blood, of those that have already been killed senselessly and murdered, and those, if we say nothing, that could and will be. And with this blood that could be on our hands, we cannot blame ourselves. We cannot blame anyone else but ourselves. That when it was in our power to make change and to bring change, we remained silent and allowed the historical conditioning that is manifesting its symptom to perpetuate in our land. What are you going to do today? How many more times are you going to turn on the TV? How many more discussions at a dinner table? How many more discussions of this senseless institutionalization of discrimination and wrong against black men will we discuss in our lunchrooms and in our offices and with our children and with our family and at car dealers and everywhere? How much more longer are we going to sit back and talk about it and not become the change that is needed and necessary for the eradication of this historical conditioning into the police departments against black men? I leave you with this. I encourage you, get your pen and paper out and begin to send or email your congressmen, your senators, and encourage them to fight with tenacity and fervor to further the passing, the must passing of the George Floyd Policing Act of 2021. God bless you.